today we're going to try to answer the question of dwell, and also we may dabble a little bit in what the low pressure regulators are and stuff like that. But a lot of people don't exactly know what exactly dwell is. The easiest way to describe or explain what dwell is that inside of your paintball gun, inside of most of the paintball guns made today, you have an air valve. And the air valve, basically what it does is it diverts the air going from one place to another for a period of time and then back to the way it came. The easiest way to describe this will be like railroad tracks, okay? You picture that the railroad tracks are pointed this way, and for 5 seconds they're going to be pointed the other way. So click, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, click, back to the other side. That's like 5 seconds of dwell, okay? Dwell is basically how long the solenoid diverts air to the other side and then goes back, okay? A lot of people ask about what, how does dwell work? What if I lower the dwell? What if I raise the dwell? What exactly is that going to do to your gun? You got to realize that the guns, most of the guns are run, they have a preset setting, and 99% of the time that works fine for almost all the guns that are on the market. Now, I know there's a lot of tinkerers out there. This is your gun. If you want to run your dwell at 0, run it at 0. If you want to run it at 1,000,000, run it at 1,000,000. I don't give a shit. So don't email me and tell me, well, I run my dwell at this. I don't care, okay? I don't care what you run your dwell at. I don't care. But the biggest thing you got to understand about dwell is just like that. Railroad tracks, okay? They're pointed this way, and for 2 seconds they're going to be pointed the other way. Click. Now the railroad cars are going that way. Click, and then it goes back. That's what dwell is. So inside of your gun, I've got 2 guns here. I've got the Lux, which actually, as you guys see, one of the first people to have the Lux with the new ASA on there that you can screw your own tank into. Oh, yeah, these will be available at the PSP Northeast Open, $1,500. I've got a Lux here, which operates very similar to a shocker. This gun runs off of 12 milliseconds of dwell. Okay, now my shockers run off of 12 milliseconds of dwell. That's what I run my shockers at. That's the factory default. It works just fine. A lot of people will ask with the spool valve guns, will I get better efficiency if I lower the dwell? And what you have to understand is that you're trading off a lot when you try to lower the dwell. One, I've found that the amount of efficiency gains that you get from lowering the dwell are very insignificant. Very insignificant. Maybe a half a pod from a full tank is all you'll maybe get out of lowering your dwell. I've also seen that by lowering your dwell on spool valve guns, what ends up happening is you now have to compensate for that track. So if you can imagine railroad cars going from this way to this way, if you want to get the same amount of railroad cars going that way, now they have to move through faster, right? Same thing with lowering your dwell on here. Usually when you lower your dwell on a spool valve gun, many times you end up having to increase the regulator, increase the pressure to compensate for that. It takes the same amount of force to get the ball out of the barrel at 300 feet per second. So if you lower the amount of time, you have to raise the amount of pressure. That's what usually happens. Now, with the Lux, which is kind of interesting, even though it is very similar to a shocker, I've seen that the Lux runs on very tight tolerances, and it's a very snug fit inside there. So because I noticed that at 12 milliseconds, the gun seemed to kind of, not really hiccup a little bit, but I noticed that it needs a longer break-in. I've been running my Lux at 14 milliseconds for about the first 10 or 15 cases to see if that settles the gun down. For the most part, it's worked. The gun's been a little bit more consistent. So obviously you can see by raising the dwell a little bit, allows me to overcome some of the tightness that's inside of the gun from breaking the gun in. Now, let's talk about another gun on the extreme, on the other side of the spectrum. This is the Vice, okay? The Vice operates at 6 milliseconds of dwell, okay? Don't ask me why it does it. Basically what it is there's less O-rings inside the gun. The gun cycles a lot faster. It's a completely different design than the Lux. So the Vice operates at 6 milliseconds of dwell. Now, right away, you'd be like, well, doesn't the Vice, the Vice operates on less dwell, is it more efficient? Well, that's not exactly the reason why. I'll get into the whole spool versus poppet valve thing a little bit later, but I wanted to talk about what exactly dwell was. Now, this gun, dwell on this gun is a lot different. It operates a lot differently than on this gun. This gun does not have a low pressure regulator. And there's quite a few guns that are out there right now that do not have a low pressure regulator. So dwell on this gun behaves a little bit different than the poppet valve gun. But that's basically, dwell is basically how much time the air valve turns on. Now it's measured in milliseconds, and there's 1,000 milliseconds in each second. So you got to remember that the difference in realistic time between 8 and 12 or 6 and 12 or 6 and 14 or 14 and 12, very small amount of time, but it can really change a lot of things on the gun. My personal recommendation is run the gun at the factory default setting and call it a day. By lowering the dwell on your gun, what usually is going to happen is, one, your gun's going to start shooting a lot more inconsistent. Two, you're going to sacrifice reliability. And we all know that reliability is one of the most important things with the paintball gun. Who gives a shit if you can shoot an extra 30 balls per tank fill? It really doesn't matter. But the fact that if you've got somebody and you're ready to put a ball on them and your gun doesn't operate, that means a lot more to me than getting an extra 20 or 30 balls out of my tank. So I got to cover that by lowering the dwell on guns, whether you've got a spool valve gun, if you've got a die, or you've got a proto, or you've got, FEP Quest, or any one of these other guns, lowering the dwell on your gun gets it into a red line. It almost, what happens is when you lower the dwell, you're going to sacrifice reliability for efficiency. And when I'm on the field and I've got people shooting back at me, the last thing I'm worried about is like, hey, look at that. I got an extra 20 balls this time that I didn't get last time. I could care less about efficiency. Most of the guns now are pretty decently efficient, as we've already seen. So I got to put that out there in terms of dwell. Go with the factory default settings is what I recommend. Read your manual. If you do not have the manual, download it and set your gun up to that. Now, if you want to tinker with it, it's your gun. I don't care. Saw the fucking thing in half. It makes no difference to me. I don't care. But if you ask me, Mike, what should I run my dwell at? I always say the factory recommendations. Now, I will tell you something else. The Intimidators, okay? Intimidators and many of the other poppet valve guns most of them are designed to run at 8 milliseconds. A lot of them are 8 milliseconds. I think even the Eagle runs at 8 milliseconds. The Alias runs at 8 milliseconds. The Mark runs at 8 milliseconds. The Protege runs at 8 milliseconds. Most of the guns that are out there today are designed to run at 8 milliseconds. Now, I will tell you this, with my rendition aliases and with what people like to call the rendition Intimidator settings, I usually ran my dwell at 9 on those. The reason why was we were playing, when we were using those guns, we were playing so much and shooting so much paint that it was very hard for me to maintain those guns on a consistent schedule. Sometimes I would maintain them every 10 cases, sometimes it would go for 30. So by having that extra millisecond of dwell allowed me to compensate for any lack of maintenance that I did on the gun. And it also prevented any sort of first shot drop off. And that's something else too. If your gun has first shot drop off at the factory recommended setting, go ahead and raise it a millisecond. I would much rather, get maybe 10 less balls per tank fill and then have first shot drop off and have to clean my barrel off out of every single game. So, like I told you, the railroad tracks, if your gun's getting first shot drop off, raise the dwell 1 millisecond and see how much more that extra hit on that solenoid may prevent that first shot drop off. So, run your dwell at the factory default setting. If you want to tinker with it, you can try to lower it, but you will sacrifice reliability for a little bit of efficiency. So your reliability is going to go from 100% to 50. Your efficiency is going to go from 80 to 82%. You're not going to get that much in gains. So run your dwell at stock. If your gun's giving a little bit of first shot drop off, try raising it a millisecond. But honestly, lowering your dwell or messing with your dwell in many, many cases isn't going to really do a lot for your gun. If your gun also has low velocity, like I've seen sometimes some of the older Angels for whatever reason, if you put a low pressure or a tank into it and the gun doesn't want to get up to the velocity that it should be up to, sometimes you can raise it. That's a different topic, but go with the default setting. If your gun's got first shot drop off, raise it by 1 millisecond, read your manual, and that should be fine. So hopefully that answers any questions on what exactly dwell is, and email me if you have any questions more about this. So thanks for tuning in.